These days, when I notice someone asking to recommend a CPU for a budget-oriented build, I always hear the same two things. A. Just get the highest i3 or low-end i5 that you can afford. And B. Wait for Ryzen 3 and its platform. The price to performance will be worth it. But what about if there was a C? What if a CPU already existed that you didn't have to wait for, and would blow away anything else when looking at the price to performance? CPUs from the mid-2000s, a bygone era of the tech world, are dirt cheap these days. But if it's cheap, does that mean it's no good? Won't it be utterly useless? Videos have been made about budget CPUs before, but I feel like the conversation deserves more investigation because it's an interesting idea to say the least. So I went and bought the cheapest CPU I could find. Intel Core 2 Duo E6300, a $4.50 CPU that runs on the older LGA 7075 socket. Straight out of 2006, it's not the fanciest chip off the block by any means. Featuring 2 cores without hyperthreading and a base clock of 1.86 GHz, a 1066 MHz frontside bus, and 2 MB of L2 cache, it's easy to understand why you wouldn't first consider the 6300 as an option in a 2017 budget build. But there's only one way to find out what this chip is capable of, and that's to play some games. I also tested a Core 2 Quad Q8400, as well as a Core i7-3770 as a baseline for what I could be expecting out of the E6300. I used a Gigabyte GA EP43T USB 3 motherboard to test the E6300 and the Q8400, and I used a Gigabyte GA Z68X UD3RB3 motherboard for the 3770. All the processors were run at their base clock speeds and had access to a GTX 1050 Ti as the graphics card, 8 gigs of DDR3 memory, as well as a 240 gig SSD to boot. In synthetic tests like Cinebench and Firestrike, the 6300 fell behind as you would expect. $4.50 isn't the magic number for everybody, but it does get interesting with the games. Starting off strong with Tomb Raider 2013, you can clearly see evidence of a mostly GPU bound game. Average frame rates are nearly identical across the board. The 2016 reboot of Doom, however, is a title that shows the advantages of having more cores and threads at your disposal. While playing Doom with a mere 2 cores may yield fewer frames, the average frame rate comes to 44, which I personally think is more than playable for the casual gamer, and the minimum is holding around a console grade 30 FPS. This game is quite fast paced, so if you want a few more frames while you play, you can always run the graphics at normal settings or a lower resolution. But can it run Crysis? While being an older game, Crysis still holds its own. But yes, we can run Crysis at an average of 65, which is very playable even with high graphics settings. Saving the best for last is GTA 5, an example of the limitations of the 6300. GTA 5 requires both a strong CPU and GPU for the best experience, and our 2 cores can't quite cut it. Settings had to be turned down to their lowest at 720p resolution, and even then we barely got a 30 FPS on average. With our Core 2 Duo having drinks at the bar and the i7 dancing up on the stage, our poor 6300 is left outside in the rain getting refused entry because you just can't quite make the cut. So, to answer our question and make a conclusion then, can you buy a CPU for $4.50, slap it in an old machine, pop in a modern GPU and go to town? What about playing games? To town I would say no, and coding videos of the E6300 will not be a pleasant experience. But can you buy one to play games? To that I would say maybe. It depends on what sort of games you play. I'd recommend doing your research beforehand, and if the games you like to play are mainly GPU bound, then you'd have a great time. But what we can take away from this experiment is this. Older chips like the 6300 are often left unloved, yet they still contain, over a decade later since their creation, so much potential.